Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes. This is Legal Matters, the program that's been designed to address the critical, sometimes contentious issues that are facing businesses and consumers today. It's legal information, practical solutions, and straight talk about a wide variety of topics that will affect your home and work life. We want to begin by thanking our legal counsel and sponsors of this program from Bazar, Grasso Law Firm in East Providence, attorneys Jacqueline Grasso and David Bazar.
Hi, Deb.
So today, the Justice Assistance Program and what it means to you. The Justice Assistance Program is the Bureau of the Department of Justice that's meant to assist local criminal justice systems to reduce, they say, reduce crime, prevent crime, crimes of violence, drug abuse, domestic abuse, and whatnot. The big picture is it's supposed to provide greater access to justice to all. The BJA, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, supposedly provides a wide range of topics that they're covering, from corrections and mental health issues to counterterrorism. They have a website. It has a very lengthy list of things that they cover, a lot of initiatives that are about kids, what to do to protect kids, youth who are in the juvenile justice system, what policies for law enforcement should be doing in handling of kids if their parents are either imprisoned or detained, even what law enforcement officials and the public should be doing about such issues as human trafficking. So there's a wide net that they cast. Of course, policies on corrections and reentry and justice system reforms, they're always hotly debated, also in political years, obviously. There's such a wide range. We're going to see if we can cover today some of those issues. Justice assistance certainly is multifaceted. We'd say that right up front. We'll see how many of the topics that we can cover. Turns out, though, Rhode Island has been a pioneer in championing some of the new programs, which hopefully we'll discuss, even some awards. So let's begin with, what is this? Jackie, David, so when people talk about justice assistance, how did that come into being?
Well, let's just start with, you've thrown out a whole net.
Yes, I did.
A wide net of a lot of topics. When you say justice assistance, to me, in Rhode Island, you're really talking about the Justice Assistance Program that Jonathan Houston's the executive director of. And that deals with a lot of the topics that you spoke of, and he does a great job, and that program has been in Rhode Island for some time, dealing with a restitution for victims of criminal cases, dealing with other issues in the criminal field, and so a lot of that is criminal-based. When you talked about some of the other programs, they're really more civil-based. Yeah. So we're talking about access to justice for people on civil cases. And the big difference there is, in a criminal case, if you are indigent and can't afford an attorney, the court will appoint an attorney for you, whether it's the public defender's office or if there's a conflict, a court-appointed attorney of one person or another, as opposed to a civil case where there's no guarantee to counsel. There's sometimes a big issue and a gap of people can't afford attorneys having what we would call access to justice.
So the American Bar Association, I guess you are part of that, do they not provide a cadre of lawyers who will volunteer just because it's the right thing to do?
Well, what we do in Rhode Island is, so in Massachusetts, every state has a bar association. So, for instance, Rhode Island Bar Association will extend assistance to somebody who does not have the financial ability to pay it. You have to qualify, so you have to fill out an application. So you can either ask for a volunteer lawyer program, which is for somebody who's indigent, or if they're just above the indigency guidelines, then you can ask for an attorney to represent you on a reduced fee basis. So there are lawyers that do that, and we as attorneys are encouraged by the bar to at least take 1 or 2 pro bono cases a year. And Massachusetts, it's the same thing.
Would they be felony cases?
No, they're civil cases. Okay, so the ones that I've done, and certainly the ones that David does, mostly family law, but occasionally we do see bankruptcies, and you volunteered for the gentleman that passed away, person that passed away.
Right, that was
that funeral case.
Yep.
So they are always asking for attorneys to volunteer their services, or if not, take it on a reduced fee basis.
Right. So you talked about the American Bar Association, and That is a voluntary organization for attorneys throughout the country to join, and they have a lot of programs where they promote access to justice, but that's not a local program, as Jackie was saying, where the Rhode Island Bar Association, which is a mandatory bar for attorneys in Rhode Island to belong to, which actually has the programs that Jackie laid out, which provide attorneys for people who can't afford attorneys in civil cases. Because as we said, when you're asking about felonies, that's obviously criminal, and when you talk about a criminal case with a felony, you have a right to have an attorney appointed for you if you can't afford one.
And even if you weren't actually serving as the pro bono representation, are there programs that help people if they even wanted to do that pro se, if they wanted to do some of their own thing but needed some guidelines? Are there some coaching or advocacy programs to help them, point them in the right direction?
It's been a topic of discussion lately. I know David's had a couple meetings on that. I can talk about Massachusetts. What we have in Massachusetts, in the family courts at least, we have something called the Lawyer of the Day program. So there's a lawyer that volunteers his or her time one day a month, one day a year, whatever it is, but they have a number of attorneys that volunteer their services one day a week so that they can see pro bono or anybody that's seeking legal advice to help them prepare paperwork to answer some of their questions. What that does is it helps reduce the amount of workload that the clerks have, because the clerks cannot give legal advice, they're not lawyers. Trying to do something like that in Rhode Island. I know David has discussed it in the past, but it would be great if we can do that. It would certainly be an immense amount of help to the clerk's
right.
office.
It's difficult on the courts, the clerk's office, the judges to deal with an ever-growing population of pro se litigants in the courtrooms. And it's difficult for attorneys because it slows the process down for everybody. So we are looking at a number of ways of trying to deal with that issue. Some states have formed access to justice commissions to start dealing with some of these issues. Rhode Island is in the process of starting to look at that. It's something that's been actually promoted by the American Bar Association, as we're talking about that group. But there's Rhode Island's different than a lot of other states. In bigger states, there are a vast number of different law firms, if you will, or legal aid societies that provide the same services and maybe in some ways compete with each other. In Rhode Island, we only have one group that does that work, and then we have the volunteer lawyer group from the Bar Association, which fills in some of the gaps that they don't cover. And so the issue really is, in Rhode Island, is if we put together a commission that can really be like one big umbrella to look at all of the issues, from providing lawyers for people who can't afford them, to providing services for pro ses who are going to represent themselves, to making sure that the access to justice is there for everybody.
And I don't know if this is really under the banner of justice assistance, but it certainly does fall into the category of having access to justice in one way. Apparently, the ACLU has been on this topic for 10 years, but there are many who are foreign language speaking people. Rhode Island has had, I guess, a court battle going on for years, but they're apparently trying very hard to have enough court-based interpreters so that their legal needs are served. Pity the person who doesn't speak English, who may be in jail for a long time, 3, 4, 5 days, without having access to a lawyer, can't communicate. Certainly justice isn't very well served then. So as far as having the funding available, I guess that was a very big issue, as it is with so many other programs that are well-intentioned. Apparently those who have limited English proficiency, they're trying very hard to support that. Is there an update on that that you can enlighten us about?
Rhode Island has complied with all the requests that was made of the state through that lawsuit that you're speaking of. Rhode Island has implemented an access to the courts through the language program. There is an interpreter's office that's part of this Supreme Court that provides interpreters to every courtroom in the state. They have a program that's been put in place pursuant to an order of the Supreme Court, an administrative order that the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court has issued. And so they're in full compliance with whatever was required of them. So if you go to a courthouse and you're someone who speaks a different language and you go to the clerk's office, you'll see a sign in whatever language hopefully you speak, because it's got a multitude of different languages on there telling you about your ability to have an interpreter go to court with you and the number that you would call to comply, so the court can comply with providing that interpreter for you.
Let me pursue that just a little bit further, David. So I understand that it was Spanish and Portuguese, Cape Verdean and Cambodian were the 4 languages, at least in Rhode Island, that was an issue. And you're talking about at the court system. What about at the point of a foreign language speaker being detained by the police? They're going then to a jail rather than to a courthouse. Is there something in place that gives that would-be offender access to justice even at that point? Does that happen at a courthouse? Not at a courthouse, excuse me, at a jailhouse, at the local police station? Do they have access to an interpreter? Should they?
My knowledge is most of the police stations do have bilingual employees that work there, so whether or not they call someone in privately,
That's
not known to me.
That's a procedure, a process that's outside of the court's purview. So it would, at least in my understanding, not be a requirement of the court to provide an interpreter for that proceeding. But the police station would have the ability, as Jackie says, to bring somebody in who can interpret. And certainly if there was an issue on a small police station, to be able to get that, a larger police station, I'm sure, would cooperate in making sure they knew how to get to the interpreter that they need to get to provide that service at that stage.
Sounds good. At the beginning of the segment, we referred to the Neil Houston, Jonathan Houston. There's an annual Houston Award that is given to citizens who help encourage or help contribute to justice being better served. And I understand that Rhode Island, anyway, tries to put forth some support for the employment problems that follow someone who's about to re-enter the system. I think that there's job training maybe within the prison. Is that considered part of a justice assistance program? And I guess there's another program that we've been reading about that is supposed to help the offender who's in jail and likely to be raped in a jail. Now, I don't really think too much about protecting the criminal, but certainly that's at a very basic level some protections needed. Are those things considered part of justice assistance, or are those part, I know that the programs exist, are they part of that banner, or what do you know about them?
Well, some of the programs you referred to are part of what that justice assistance program that we had mentioned Jonathan Houston running provides.
Yeah.
Not all of the things that you mentioned. So I would start out by saying that the Justice Assistance Program in Rhode Island, as we had said earlier, has been around for a long time. The award in honor of, I think it's Neil Houston, has been an award that's really well given to someone who's well-deserved in doing something in the area that they're promoting.
Yes.
And they have a lovely dinner that I've never been invited to.
There's a lengthy list of people who are I guess, involved in this, and at least it seems that there's an awful lot of attention of late because people are caring about supporting the victims and even at times the criminals who are about to re-enter so that they can reduce recidivism.
Right.
And is that part of justice assistance also?
Sure, it is, and on many levels. That's part of what the goal of justice assistance is. It's really, they assist victims, as I said, in collecting restitution and assist the court in cases where the court system doesn't have an ability to follow the restitution part because maybe a person wasn't put on probation where the probation department could do that. So they do assist on both ends of that. And as you were talking about the court system, you were talking about the victims. There's also victim advocates in the court system to help people who are the victims of crime and to navigate their way through the court system.
Yeah, restraining orders, particularly anytime a person goes in for a restraining order for domestic abuse, they're immediately paired up with a victim's advocate. And anytime I go to court in Massachusetts courts, especially in the family court, there is always a victim's advocate sitting in the courtroom. So they're there, they volunteer their time, and it's a great service provided to people. And in criminal cases, too, they play an important role to victims, especially in a case that's being litigated and if the case is going to be dismissed or how it's going to be prosecuted. So they do play an important role.
And the same in Rhode Island. And in Rhode Island, the victim advocate is a crucial piece to trying to not only help the victim navigate the court system, but also to speak on the victim's behalf or with the victim before they go in front of a judge. Many times we see these cases where the victim wants to drop the no contact order. I want the criminal, so to speak, the offender back in the house or to speak to me or be able to talk to them. Sometimes they have children together and there's a need to talk about that. Well, the victim's advocate will speak to that person to make sure that they know what they're doing, that there's no undue influence, that there's nothing that the court needs to know about that's influencing them in making a poor decision. And so before the court would even consider discussing the dropping of a no-contact order, they're going to want to hear from the victim's advocate and to determine through that process whether or not there's something else going on that the judge needs to know about.
It's good to know, helpful for the victim. Apparently there's a Rhode Island Victims Assistance Portal that's supposed to also address the issue of compensation if someone has been hurt by someone, stolen from, whatever, that they manage to assess what the loss is and make restitution. That certainly seems to speak to giving access to justice to that victim. Is that part of a law that's about to be enacted, or is that just something that they're trying to even the score with? Is that part of a general policy as much as it is a law at this point?
The Victims' Compensation Fund.
Well, there's been a victims' compensation fund for some time.
Yes.
And at one point in time, attorneys were involved in helping people file claims, but the Treasurer's Office in Rhode Island, which runs that, has more streamlined it and taken attorneys out of it. You know a bit about that.
But part of our dues annually go to that.
That's another one. That's Rhode Island Bar Association has a fund for people whose money has been misappropriated by an attorney where there might not be coverage through malpractice or otherwise. Right.
So if there was an injury or something that an offender had caused, I don't know if that's part of what's considered to be the victim's compensation fund per se, but certainly knowing that they're continuing to move along in that direction to make sure that that victim has support along the way, financial and or otherwise, as you're saying, to make sure that you vet whether or not the man who perpetrated some domestic abuse should actually be back in the house.
Well, they have to file an application for compensation, and I believe the Treasurer's Office now oversees that.
That's right.
There's usually a backlog in trying to get whatever compensation you're entitled to, but they have to figure out how much compensation you're entitled to.
How do they determine that?
That's a good question.
Well,
how do you evaluate that?
When the lawyers were involved, it was something that went through the court process. So you would file all the paperwork with the Treasurer's Office. They had attorneys that would come to court with you, and if you could work something out by agreement, that was fine. If not, the court would decide. Now I think it's done right within the Treasurer's Office. The same paperwork or similar paperwork is involved that's filled out with your medical bills and whatever other uncovered expenses you might have, your injuries, and then they make a determination. And it used to be, I'm not sure since lawyers haven't been involved in this, a maximum of $25,000 per claim, and that may still be the case.
And how is that funded?
There's money that's been appropriated through it. Yeah.
I understand that even in Massachusetts...
Well, actually, go back a step. That used to be, and maybe still is, part of the court costs in a criminal case were put towards that fund as well.
Good to know. Apparently in Massachusetts they have programs too that are supposed to be helpful in particular to youth who need to have some job training or whatever. If they had been perhaps not quite serious offenders, the thought is if we can provide some after-school support and some job training, perhaps they'll choose the right path versus going down the wrong path, which then puts them back into the juvenile justice system again, and to an even greater extent. So between grants for programs and money for training programs, are you saying that these pretty much are things that people are paying for through their taxes in a general way?
Well,
apart from training, anyway.
Some of those are paid for through that. Some are done through grants. In Rhode Island, there was a program which I don't think exists any longer called the RIDE program, Reducing Youthful Dangerous Decisions, RYDD. And I believe that program, which was for children up to maybe the age of 20, was a program where they'd go to Rhode Island Hospital, they'd sit in on some of the emergency room things and some other things that they went through in order to have a case dismissed, or whether it's a traffic case or municipal court case or family court case. And the idea of the program was to sort of like scared straight, you know, see what bad decisions can make. But I think that program was all funded by a grant, and I think it may be done because the grant may have worked its way out.
Apparently, in each one of the states, whether they have justice assistance program per se, there's some sort of grant program that's geared to doing some of these things. And apparently, people feel very strongly about trying to promote different kinds of youth initiatives or some such that are supportive of offenders to get them back on the right track or keep them from going farther astray. Let's talk about family reunification. Apparently, that is yet another initiative that seems to be under the loose banner of justice assistance, in the sense of having access to justice. But how does that actually work in the case of reunification? If you have a domestic abuse situation or you have a child that's removed from the family, it seems like that's part of a DCYF issue. How does that come together under a banner of giving access to justice to the family or the child?
Well, the goal with DCYF cases is always family reunification.
Yes.
When it's reasonable, when it's possible. So, for instance, somebody has an addiction to drugs or alcohol, and the child's removed from the home. The goal is for the parent or parents to get the appropriate treatment and counseling, and eventually reunify the child with the parents. Because they don't want to remove the children permanently. That's never been the intention of DCYF. If it warrants a permanent removal, that's a different case altogether. But the goal is reunification.
And so the access to justice portion of it, I would say, is since it's such a fundamental right to be able to raise your children and not have your children taken from you, not to have your rights terminated, the court will appoint attorneys for you in those circumstances. So like a criminal case and like a case where in a civil case you don't have a right in a civil case to get an attorney, but there are programs for it. In this case, it's closer to the criminal case where the court will appoint an attorney for you if you can't afford one.
They also appoint attorneys for the children.
That's
as well.
right.
Yeah.
So that's right. It would be, that's a matter of having the children having access to justice.
Right.
So whether it's a grant or a program or some combination of the two, as with anything, there's always some interest in having accountability. Is it effective? Is it working? From your experience, and I do mean this just purely anecdotally, do you have any sense of what the degree to which something is working when they're trying to help kids or have the law enforcement officials better handle children when they become part of a terrible mix-up with the families being incarcerated or whatever? Do you have any anecdotal information about whether or not these programs actually are worth taxpayer or grant funding?
My impression would be yes, they're always worth it. If you can help somebody who's in need, then the goal is to assist them.
Yeah, and we've had several cases where the programs that DCYF has access to has really helped families get to a point where they can have that reunification and help children who have been maybe at the beginning shuttled from a foster home to a family, back to their family, and have programs in place so that once they're already ready to get back into that original home, the home that they belong in, that there is a much greater chance of success of that family unit staying together.
It certainly sounds like it's so worthwhile to have that happen. On a personal front, I've long been involved with the Mental Health Association of Rhode Island, and I'm sure that everyone has heard of stories where police have been involved and something bad happened where someone who has some issues, mental disorder, some sort of mental health issue, and force is applied rather than the backing or the understanding of having a medical professional who might know how to handle it otherwise. So apparently there's some interest nationally, and they're having a mental health court that would provide access to justice for this particular population. Thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's a really important idea, because they're just like any other illness, people who need help that the criminal justice system is not really capable of providing. We have in Rhode Island specialized courts for different things. We have a specialized gun court for people who commit crimes with guns.
Drug court.
We have the drug court for people, and again, it's another issue about addiction and illness, to deal with that illness. And we have, I believe, a court for veterans, a veterans court for veterans who have committed crimes, and they want to keep those cases separate. So this is just another example of a specialized court that serves as population of people who have special interests and needs as a result of whatever illness or issue that they've been dealing with.
I suspect that while I certainly would advocate for that, I also understand that with it goes a cadre of people that need to be behind it, as well as funding for it, which certainly complicates issues on many occasions. How about the idea of justice for the imprisoned person? I alluded to it earlier. Someone who's in prison, well, I understand, as you've explained, and you have too, that you lose certain rights when you're in prison. Okay, I'm not going to vote if I'm in prison, but there are some basic rights that I have too, and one of them is perhaps not to be sexually abused. Is there much interest in supporting that, or is there just relatively not so much so because there are so many other more pressing needs for those who have been victimized rather than on the other side of the fence?
I was thinking the hierarchy of importance, that would probably be down the lower end.
I'm sure there are a lot of people who feel that way. If you committed a crime, you're going to do your time, and it's not going to be pretty necessarily. I understand that funding is always an issue. I understand that in those court systems, having the right expertise is an important issue. In the issue with the prisons, if there's a way of protecting somebody, that should be done. But I'll go with Jackie and say that we've got some other issues that may be higher importance and have to deal with that. But just because you did something wrong and you're going to pay a penalty for that, doesn't give somebody a right to make those consequences worse than they already are.
So you could certainly understand that any prison could say, we have zero tolerance for this kind of misbehavior. It's just not acceptable. So does the prisoner end up having a right to have access to the justice system on his own behalf if he has been sexually abused, or is that just not even an option?
Well, it sounds like a civil rights violation in that case, not only a criminal matter, but also a civil rights violation.
So there is some access
civil
to
rights, ACLU maybe.
There may be an ACLU issue. There may be. I know there have been multitudes of federal cases resulting from imprisoned populations. So I'm sure if it's out there, they'll know about it and they'll find their access to justice.
And women who are in prison, the short amount of time that's left, women in prison who are pregnant and have children, do they have access to the justice system to make sure that their newborn is safe? Do they put them in DCYF automatically? Is that their access to justice?
I believe they have a right to know where the child is going to be placed.
Right.
But
yeah, I would assume that it becomes a DCYF case if there's not another parent who's available to care for the child.
Well, between reentry, corrections, possible prison or juvenile justice system reform, lots of hotly debated topics. Hopefully we've created some interesting discussion for you. I hope that you will stay tuned as our discussion of legal matters will continue. We thank Jackie and David and the Bazar Grasso Law Firm in East Providence.
Thank you.